Ruby Thompson stepped into the diner just as the sky began to glow pink and gold. The air smelled of fresh coffee and warm toast. She took a deep breath and smiled as she rang the small bell on the front door. A tiny chime sounded, and the regulars looked up. They waved and nodded. Ruby walked behind the counter, tying her apron tight around her waist. Her name tag caught the light. Ruby? It felt like a small invitation every time someone read it. She moved with quiet confidence as she filled the big coffee pot. Steam rose in soft clouds. Each morning, she made the first pot extra hot for Mr. Jenkins, who liked his coffee stronger than steel. She poured dark liquid into a mug and wiped the counter. The diner's tile floor was clean, shining under the pale morning light. She slid 2 plates of scrambled eggs and bacon down to the grill, where the cook Maria flipped pancakes on a flat griddle. The smell of butter and syrup mixed with coffee and bacon, and it made Ruby's stomach rumble just a little.
Out front.
The wooden booths waited, polished by years of use. The red leather seats were soft from so many visitors sitting down. Each booth seemed to whisper stories of happy breakfasts, quiet conversations, and friendly laughter. The walls had old black and white photos of the town, a dusty main street, an old train station, and happy families waving from the front porch of a farmhouse. Ruby loved those pictures. They reminded her that every person had a past, and that everyone who walked through the diner door carried a story inside them. She wiped her hands on a clean towel and bent to set a sugar jar at a quiet table near the window. A gray-haired woman named Mrs. Langley smiled at her. She was reading a newspaper. "Good morning, Ruby," she said in a soft voice. Ruby leaned down and said, "Morning, Mrs. Langley. Coffee." Mrs. Langley nodded, her eyes kind and slow. Ruby filled her cup and asked gently, "Any eggs today?" "Just toast, dear," she answered. Ruby set the plate and cup in front of her, then straightened up. She caught herself smoothing her sleeve down over her arm out of habit. The sleeve was always right, hiding the pale scars. As the morning rush grew, Ruby moved from table to table. She remembered each voice. There was Mr. Lee, who always ordered an omelet with extra cheese. There was the young couple on their first date, whispering and giggling over coffee. There was the delivery driver who stopped by for a quick breakfast and a smile from Ruby before heading back on the road. Each person made her feel that her work mattered. She liked how simple it was to offer someone food, a kind word, a warm cup. It felt honest. But even as she smiled and served, she was aware of her scars. They ran from her wrist to just below her elbow, pale lines on her skin. She had learned long ago to keep them hidden under her long-sleeve shirts. Today the diner was warm, and she had rolled her sleeves up, trusting that no one would stare. Still, she felt a sudden chill run through her when she sensed eyes on her arm. At first, she thought it was just another customer focusing too hard on his breakfast. She poured syrup over a stack of pancakes and heard a soft snicker. She froze, spatula in hand, unsure where the sound had come from. Ruby turned slowly and saw a group of teenagers in the corner booth. They wore hoodies and baseball caps. They were hunched together, whispering and pointing. Their heads tipped toward each other like birds pecking at crumbs. One of them turned and looked straight at her. His eyes were curious, but his lips curled in a grin. She felt her heart speed up, and she hurried past them, placing a mug of coffee at the next table as if rushing would erase the moment. "Maria." The cook called from the kitchen. "Ruby, can we get the hash browns out faster? We're backed up." Ruby gave a quick smile and ran back to the grill. She scooped spilled pancake batter off her apron and handed Maria a spatula to flip more eggs. Maria's bright laugh filled the kitchen. "Don't mind those kids," she said, nodding toward the front. "Kids will be kids." Ruby nodded, but inside she felt uneasy. She loved kids. She had volunteered at the community center teaching art to children, yet those few snickers cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She took a moment to steady herself by the coffee station. She reached out and brushed her sleeve over her skin, wishing she could slide a shadow over her scars. She remembered the day. She got them. A machine accident at the factory where she worked years ago, before moving to this town. She had cried then, feeling ugly and broken, but she survived. She healed. The scars were proof of that, and part of her wanted to show them off like a medal. But most days, she kept them to herself. A loud crash in the back made her jump. She hurried to see that a stack of plates had fallen behind the counter. "Sorry," she called as she knelt to pick up the pieces. Her apron caught on a broken plate, tearing a small thread. She stood up quickly, dusting flour from her knee, and carried the clean plates to the shelf. Maria appeared with fresh hash browns and gave Ruby a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Nice save," she said with a grin. Ruby smiled back, her heart lifting. Working with Maria and the rest of the team made her feel safe. The door chimed again, and more customers came in. Ruby greeted each one by name when she could. "John, good to see you, Anna. How's your little boy?" She felt the weight of their trust and tried to match it with her best energy. She served plates with bacon crisp and eggs just set, refilling coffee cups before they were empty. The diner hummed with conversation, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the grill, and the soft buzz of the neon sign by the door. Ruby felt at home here. Still between smiles, she saw the teens watching. Their eyes flicked back and forth, and every time she passed, she felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She wondered if they thought she was strange or broken, urged to hide or disappear. A sudden wave of sadness gripped her, and she paused by the window, pretending to wipe a spot on the glass. She took a slow breath, counting silently to 3. Then she forced herself to look ahead. She lifted her chin and squared her shoulders. She was strong. She had come through a hard time, and she owed herself the chance to be proud here, serving good food, earning a living honestly. As the teens whispered again, one of them pointed at her arm and laughed quietly. Ruby heard the sound like a small bell ringing in her mind. She had 2 choices: run away or stand her ground. She chose to stand. She walked back to the counter, poured more coffee, and called out, "Hash browns, table 6. Her voice was steady. The teens fell silent, turning their heads, surprised by her calm. She set the plate down and gave them a small smile. They shifted uncomfortably and looked away. Ruby turned back to her tasks. She served Mrs. Langley more toast and stopped by Mr. Jenkins's table with refills. Their warm thank yous and friendly chatter wrapped around her like a blanket. The world outside the diner could be cruel, but inside these walls she had allies. She wiped her hands on her apron once more and made a silent promise to herself. She would not let fear keep her in the shadows. Tomorrow, she would wear a short-sleeved shirt proudly, scars in full view. The morning rush began to slow as the clock's hand crept past 9. Ruby stacked unused menus and wiped each spot of syrup from the counter. She felt tired, but good tired from standing, tired from smiling, tired from choosing courage. Diner felt alive with memories and hopes, and she was part of those stories now. She glanced toward the teens, who were quietly finishing their meal. They made no sound now, only looked down at their plates. Ruby caught one of their eyes and offered a small nod. It was not a bow, but a quiet greeting. "I see you, and I am here." She turned back toward the kitchen and called, "Lunch prep, please." Maria winked at her from the grill. Ruby's chest swelled with something like pride. She stepped outside for a moment to feel the morning air on her face. The sun was higher now, warm on her skin. She rolled her sleeves back down, but this time, she did not fuss with them. She let the ridges of her scars rest under the fabric. They were a part of her story, and she felt ready to share more of it when the time came. For now, she would keep serving coffee and smiles, one plate at a time. Ruby moved down the line of booths carrying a tray piled high with mugs of coffee and plates of pancakes. The morning light through the windows made everything look warm and soft. She smiled at each customer, setting a plate here, pouring coffee, there. Then she heard a low murmur from the corner booth. It sounded like hushed voices passing a secret back and forth. She looked toward the booth and saw 4 young people leaning in close. One of them tapped his friend's arm and pointed. At Ruby's rolled-up sleeve, the others followed his gaze. Their eyes rested on the pale lines etched into her skin. Ruby felt a cold shiver run through her. She forced herself to keep smiling. "Here you go," she said, setting a plate before the couple at the next table. Her voice trembled, but she tried to steady it. As she turned, she caught a quick glimpse of their faces. Two of the teens had smirks. The other two wore expressions of curiosity mixed with amusement. She forced her shoulders down, reminding herself that she was safe here. She walked back to the coffee station to refill a cup for Mr. Jenkins, who sat at the counter reading his crossword puzzle. "More coffee, Mr. Jenkins?" she asked, pouring the dark liquid into his mug. He looked up and smiled kindly. "Thank you, Ruby," he said. His warmth grounded her for a moment. She breathed in the scent of coffee beans, a smell she loved more than anything. Behind her, she heard the teens laugh. It started small, just a soft giggle, then grew into a louder snicker. Ruby swallowed hard. Her hand shook as she reached for the sugar jar. She dropped the lid and it clattered to the floor. Her heart pounded. She bent quickly to pick it up, cheeks burning as she did. She felt their eyes like tiny needles, pricking at her confidence. She slipped the lid back on the jar and looked toward the teens. One boy leaned back and laughed again, louder this time. His friends joined in, some whispering words she could almost hear. Ruby's breath caught in her throat. She imagined the words. "What happened to you? Did she get into a fight? Looks like a car accident?" She wanted to run away, to hide somewhere safe. But she was at work, and people depended on her here. She straightened and carried the coffee back to the counter. Her hands still trembled. Maria the cook caught her eye through the pass-through window. Maria nodded once and mouthed, "You okay?" Ruby gave a small nod. She wiped her palms on her apron and sighed quietly. She could feel her face hot with embarrassment. She tried to focus on another table, a family of 3 sharing a stack of blueberry pancakes. The little girl looked up at her with wide eyes. "Can I have some more syrup, please?" she asked in a bright, clear voice. Ruby smiled at the girl. "Of course," she said, pouring sweet syrup over the pancakes. The child clapped her hands and said, "Thank you." That simple kindness felt like a gentle breeze after a storm. Ruby's heart eased a little. She walked back to the teens' booth, determined to ignore them. She set down a plate of eggs and toast in front of the boy with the baseball cap and said quietly, "Here you go." Her voice was calm now, steady as the coffee pot humming behind her. The boy looked up, surprised. He didn't say thank you. He just stared at the plate, then glanced at her arm again. His eyes seemed to ask a question without words. Ruby felt that question land in her chest, like a small stone. She didn't answer. She turned and hurried away to refill their water. Glasses instead. Back at the sink, she swallowed hard and closed her eyes for a moment. She rinsed the glasses, counting the seconds as she waited for them to come out clear. 1, 2, 3. She let the sound of water fill her mind. When she opened her eyes, she saw her reflection in the stainless steel. Her eyes looked red, but her shoulders were straight. She could do this. As she carried the glasses toward the booth, her foot caught on a rug edge. She stumbled forward slightly, heart racing, and almost dropped the tray. Maria was there in a flash, reaching out to steady it. "Careful," Maria said softly, placing a hand on Ruby's back. "You good?" Ruby nodded again. Her voice caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. Maria squeezed her shoulder and then stepped back to cook an order, giving Ruby the space she needed. The teens watched this new drama unfold. Their whispers died down. They looked at each other, perhaps realizing they had gone too far. Ruby set the water glasses down and stood quietly behind the tray for a moment, waiting for them to speak. The boy in the cap shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Finally, one of the girls spoke, her voice softer now. "We're sorry," she said, almost in a whisper. "We didn't mean to laugh." Ruby looked at her, searching the girl's eyes. She saw regret, not cruelty. It made her chest tighten with relief and sadness at the same time. Ruby took a slow breath. She could have ignored the apology, walked away and let the moment pass. But something in her asked for compassion, both hers and theirs. She spoke quietly, so only they could hear. "Thank you," she said. "I know you didn't realize." Her voice was calm. She placed a hand lightly on the tray and straightened her shoulders. The teens looked at her, and for a moment the diner seemed to still around them. She turned and walked away, heading for the coffee station once more. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. She focused on the routine: fill the pot, clean the spout, wipe the counter. She let the steam rise around her, a warm swirl that pushed the cold out. She could almost forget what had happened, lost in the ordinary tasks she knew so well. She brought fresh coffee to the next table and overheard snippets of conversation: a young mother talking about her child's school, two old friends catching up on life. The noise felt comforting, like a blanket wrapping around her. She poured coffee, refilled plates, collected empty mugs. She found her rhythm again, a steady dance of care and service. Every so often, she glanced toward the teen's booth, sat quietly, the plate of eggs and toast still half-eaten. They looked different, now less sure of themselves, quieter, respectful even. Ruby wondered if they spoke about her scars in whispers or if they just sat, lost in thought. She didn't know, but she felt a gentle satisfaction that she had not run away. As the rush slowed and the diner settled into a steady, quiet hum, Ruby took a moment by the window. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass and watched the street outside. A delivery van rumbled past, and a newspaper boy biked by, papers tucked under his arm. The world kept moving, but inside her, something had shifted. She felt a flicker of pride. She had faced their laughter and stayed. She wiped her forehead and turned back to the counter. Maria was there, handing her a plate of muffins. "You did good," Maria said in a low voice. Ruby took a muffin and nodded her thanks. She tore off a piece and tasted it: sweet, buttery, perfect. The small pleasure felt like a reward. Ruby picked up the tray and carried the muffins to the 14-year-old who was reading a comic book. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw the treat. "Oh, thanks," she said. Ruby smiled, and in that moment, she remembered why she loved this job so much. It was not just about serving food, but about moments of kindness, about connecting. She realized that her scars were part of her story, and she could choose how that story was told. She collected the empty plates and mugs from the tables one by one. Each step felt lighter than before. She moved behind the counter and washed her hands. She looked at the scars for a moment, then slid her sleeve back over them. Today she had shown courage without a word, and she felt strong. Her scars might always draw questions or stares, but she had grown in this small battle. The door chimed again as a new customer stepped in. Ruby squared her shoulders and met them with her usual greeting, a smile that reached her eyes. "Good afternoon," she said. The customer returned the smile, and Ruby felt the gentle glow of someone truly seen. The laughter from the teens was already fading in her memory, replaced by the trust of those she served. She took the order and made her way through the diner, ready for whatever came next, one confident step at a time. Joe Martin drove the old pickup along the cracked road that led past the VA clinic. He parked under a tall oak tree, its branches casting a lace of shadow over the hood. The engine cooled with a soft tick. He sat for a moment, resting his hands on the steering wheel. His fingers trembled slightly from the morning's shaking. He had just come from a routine checkup, a friendly nurse measuring his blood pressure and testing his reflexes. He was 72 now, a little slower, a little stiffer, but still standing. That counted for something. He grabbed his weathered leather jacket from the passenger seat and lifted it around his shoulders. He patted the breast pocket, where he kept a faded photo of his old unit men in combat gear, smiling despite the dirt. He tapped the photo gently, a habit he kept since returning from service 25 years ago. It reminded him of the bond he had formed with those men. He missed them still. He missed the way they trusted each other without words, the way they had each other's backs in times of danger. Joe unlocked the door and walked toward Miller's Diner. The neon sign buzzed at midday, red letters spelling diner above a small parking lot. He straightened his jacket collar and pushed open the heavy glass door. Bell chimed overhead. Inside, the diner hummed with conversation and clatter. The smell of grilled cheese and fresh coffee greeted him. Booths lined the walls, and a long counter with red leather stools ran along the window. He nodded to Ruby as she poured coffee for a table of 3. Her smile was warm as always. She wore a long-sleeved blouse, and her hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. Joe had learned her name weeks ago when she served him breakfast. Today, he spotted her name tag glinting in the light. He picked an empty booth by the window, away from the door's draft. He slid into the seat, his boots hitting the vinyl cushion with a soft thump. A waitress handed him a menu. It was laminated and had small pictures of pancakes, omelets, and burgers. Joe ran a finger across the list. He was not hungry for much. A simple turkey sandwich and coffee felt right. He folded the menu and set it aside. For a moment, he stared out the window at Main Street. A delivery truck rumbled by. A woman with a shopping bag hurried into the pharmacy. He felt a calm settle over him in the gentle bustle. Ruby appeared beside his booth with a pad and pen. She knelt down on one knee to write his order. Joe watched her, noting the care in her eyes when she listened. She scribbled turkey sandwich, coffee, black, please, and nodded. Her voice was soft, coming right up. She stood again and gave him a small wave before heading to the kitchen. Joe folded his hands on the table and closed his eyes. He remembered the clamor of the battlefield, the bark of orders, and the rumble of trucks crossing muddy fields. But here, everything felt peaceful. The din of the grill, the hiss of the coffee machine, the gentle chatter of customers, this was a place to heal. He looked at the half-empty cup of water that had been set before him. He brought it to his lips and took a sip. After a few minutes, Ruby returned with a steaming mug of coffee on a saucer. She placed it carefully in front of him. Joe lifted it by the handle and smelled the dark, rich aroma. He closed his eyes and let the warmth spread through his chest. He took a slow sip and savored the flavor. It was exactly what he needed. Ruby's tray appeared again, this time holding a turkey sandwich cut in half with simple lettuce and tomato. She set it down and smiled. "Here you go," she said. "Let me know if you need anything else." Joe nodded his thanks. He unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. The bread was soft, the turkey moist. He chewed slowly, enjoying each mouthful. He glanced at the other customers. A young couple laughed over pancakes. An elderly man read his newspaper at the counter. A delivery driver ate eggs and toast, tapping his fingers on the plate. The diner felt alive with small stories. Joe felt part of something larger, a quiet community that welcomed him without judgment. He finished his sandwich and leaned back. His legs ached from sitting too long. He folded the napkin under his plate and signaled Ruby with a small hand raise. She came over promptly, kneeling to collect his plate and cup. As she reached forward, her sleeve shifted, sliding up a little on her arm. Joe caught sight of a design inked onto her skin. It was a faded emblem, a round patch with letters and stripes worn by time. Joe's breath caught in his throat. He stared, unable to move. His heart pounded so loudly he thought perhaps she could hear it. The tattoo matched the one he had on his own forearm, hidden beneath his jacket cuff. It was the symbol of the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion. He had served with them in his 20s 2 decades ago. He had not thought of that unit's crest in years. He had not imagined finding it here, in a small diner in a quiet town. He felt frozen, the world narrowing to that tattoo. Ruby looked up and saw him staring. She paused with the plate in her hands, an expression of concern crossing her face. She held the plate gently, as if she might drop it. Joe's mind buzzed with memories: muddy trenches, watchtowers in the desert, the faces of men he had lost. He felt a lump in his throat, a pain that was both sorrow and pride. Finally, his mouth moved. He spoke in a quiet voice, almost a whisper. "Is that the 2nd Recon?" His words trembled. Ruby blinked and looked down at her arm. She had rolled her sleeve up herself this morning, unaware that the sun would be so bright. She reached up and brushed the sleeve back, revealing the tattoo fully. Joe recognized the letters Recon, the eagle perched on crossed rifles, the stars circling them. Ruby's eyes widened as she felt his gaze. She touched the tattoo lightly with 2 fingers, tracing the faded lines. "Yes," she said, her voice gentle. "I got it after I lost someone." Her words trembled. Joe felt tears prick his eyes. He could see grief in her expression. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. He searched her face for more. A moment passed. The diners. Noises drifted around them, plates clinking, a coffee machine steaming, distant laughter. But at that table by the window, the world stood still. Joe remembered why he had joined the Marines, why he had trusted those men with his life, remembered why Ruby had chosen that tattoo. He felt a sudden kinship, a bond as strong as any patrol. He opened his jacket cuff and lifted his sleeve, revealing his own faded emblem. It was older, more worn, but unmistakably the same. Ruby gasped softly. "You served with them?" she asked. Her eyes filled with wonder. Joe nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. 1968, he said quietly. Vietnam. He paused as the words left his mouth. I was there. Ruby looked at him, and Joe felt a gentle warmth of recognition pass between them. It was as if they had both carried that memory inside without speaking. He reached out and placed his hand over hers on the table. His fingers brushed her tattoo, feeling the raised skin. "Thank you for honoring them," he said softly. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, blinking back a tear that rolled down her cheek. Joe squeezed her hand, a simple gesture of respect. The moment was quiet but powerful, a meeting of two stories woven by a common thread. Ruby withdrew her hand gently, standing up and gathering his empty dishes. Joe sat back, feeling a calm wash over him. He realized he had not felt this peace in years. He watched as Ruby carried the plates to the kitchen, her movements steady now, free of hesitation. He felt grateful for that simple gesture, her kneeling, her honesty, her tattoo. He could not imagine what pain had driven her to that symbol, but he felt honored to share it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded letter. He had carried it for weeks, wanting to deliver it in person. It was addressed to the families of his old unit, a small charity drive he had organized. He folded it back up and tucked it away. Today was not the day for paperwork. Today was the day he found a friend. He finished his coffee, the warmth sinking into his belly. He stood and left a tip on the table more than usual. He slipped on his jacket and walked to the counter. Ruby was wiping a glass behind the register. She looked up, surprise and relief shining in her eyes when she saw him there. "Thank you for lunch," he said, his voice steady, "and thank you for this." He tapped his own cuff. Ruby nodded, her smile soft. "Anytime, Joe," she said. He tipped his hat and stepped outside into the afternoon sun. The town felt brighter now, each sound sharper, each color more alive. He walked to his truck with a lighter step, carrying the shared memory of service and loss, and the promise of new friendship. Joe set his coffee cup back on the saucer and reached into his wallet. He counted out bills, folded them carefully, and placed them on the table beside his empty plate. The diner around him hummed softly with afternoon chatter and the faint hiss of the grill. Ruby approached with a small notepad in her hand, expecting a tip or a quick thank you. Instead, she saw Joe's hand resting on top of the money, his fingers still curled into a loose fist. He looked up at her with an expression. She did not recognize at first one of deep respect and kindness. "I'd like to ask you something," Joe said, his voice gentle. He pointed toward her arm where the edge of her sleeve had slipped back slightly. The faded unit crest peeked out again, a silent emblem against her skin. Ruby felt her breath catch. She had tried all day to keep that moment buried under polite smiles and quick steps. But here it was, shining in the late afternoon light. Impossible to hide. Ruby knelt beside his table, setting her pad down with a soft thud. "Yes," she asked, her voice small. She tried to sound calm, but she could feel her heart beating fast, too fast. She lifted the edge of her sleeve and brushed the tattoo lightly with her fingertip. The ink was older, softer around the edges than Joe's, but the design was the same. An eagle spread wide over crossed rifles, same circle of stars he remembered so well. Joe's eyes filled with tears before he could stop them. He blinked hard and reached out to steady himself on the table. I thought I was the only one," he murmured. His voice shook. He pushed the bills closer to the edge. "I used to see this every day back then. It was the sign of my unit. You served with them too?"
Nice.
Ruby closed her eyes for a moment and let out a small sigh. She could feel the hope and fear mingling inside her. She nodded slowly. "I did," she said. "I joined a few years after you, also Vietnam." Her voice was soft, as if the words themselves might break. She glanced away, staring at the Formica tabletop, where the grain of the pattern looked like waves on water. Joe reached out and gently lifted her hand. His fingers brushed against her palm, and Ruby felt a rush of warmth. It was the first time anyone had touched her arm since she had hidden under that sleeve. "Why'd you get it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ruby drew in a quiet breath. She remembered the day she had decided to get the tattoo. She'd been 23, living in a noisy city far from home. She carried guilt in her heart for a friend she had lost, Mark Arlington. They had trained together in the same battalion. Mark had laughed when she showed up to his guard post with coffee one morning. He loved black coffee as strong as a punch, and he always teased her about it. A few weeks later, he never came back from patrol. No one told her much, only that an explosion had taken him. She had cried for days, angry at the world and at herself. "I got it for Mark," Ruby whispered. Her voice trembled. "He was my friend. He saved me once, before I even joined. He kept me alive in that jungle. I thought if I had his unit crest on me, I could carry a piece of him forward, remember him, honor him." Joe closed his eyes and swallowed. He felt the weight of Ruby's words settle in his chest. He remembered Mark's face, the bright smile, the easy way he joked with everyone. He had never met Ruby, but in that moment, he felt he knew her pain intimately. He squeezed her hand, a simple gesture of solidarity. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for honoring him, and all of us." He pointed to his own cuff and lifted his sleeve to show his emblem. "I never thought I'd see it again." Ruby blinked and pressed her lips together, trying to hold back new tears. She smiled faintly as she saw Joe's crest, worn and faded by years of time. The shared symbol between them felt like a bridge, connecting two strangers into something more, something like family. Joe let go of her hand and leaned back in his seat. He folded his arms on the table, the afternoon sun turning his silver hair to gold. "Would you like to sit with me?" he asked. "I'd like to hear more about Mark, if you're comfortable." Ruby hesitated, then nodded. She placed her pad and pen aside carefully and took the seat across from him. She tried to smooth her apron, but her hands were still trembling. Watched her with steady eyes, his presence calm and patient. She felt safe to speak. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The diner carried on around them, but their small corner felt private. Finally, Ruby spoke. "Mark and I were kids, really. I was a volunteer nurse's aide, and he was a radio operator."
Iowa.
He had a laugh loud enough to hear halfway down the jungle path. Joe closed his eyes again and nodded. "I remember the jungle," he said. "The heat, the rain, the nights lit by distant flares. It can feel like the world ends there." Ruby smiled sadly. "Mark used to say, if you could laugh in the jungle, you could laugh anywhere, even under gunfire." She paused, blinking hard. "One night, we were pinned down for hours. I thought we'd never get out. He crawled to me and handed me his canteen. He said, 'Drink up, Doc. We've got work to do.' Then he dragged me to a shallow trench and stayed with me until dawn. I can't remember much after that, but I know his hand was warm." Joe inhaled deeply. He remembered similar nights he reached out and placed his hand over hers. "He was a good man," he said. "Keep talking about him." Encouraged, Ruby told more. How Mark had loved cooking. How he had a secret stash of chocolate bars he shared only with her. How he taught her to whistle a song so she could send secret messages back to base. She spoke of the dark day when the unit had moved out and Mark did not climb into the truck. How they found his radio, broken and scorched. How she stood alone in the dust and screamed his name until her voice broke. Tears streamed down Ruby's face as she spoke. Joe sat quietly, nodding and wiping a tear from his own cheek. He did not rush her or try to comfort her too soon. He knew grief needed space and time. When she finished, she leaned back, spent from memory. Joe reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He placed it gently on the table before her. Ruby unwrapped it with shaking fingers. Inside was a dog tag on a simple chain. The metal was dull, but the engraving was clear. PFCJ Martin, 2nd. Recon Vietnam? Ruby's breath caught. She looked up at Joe. "I found it after we left," Joe said quietly. "It was at the bottom of a pack." I carried it home, but never had the heart to look." He slid the tag toward her. "I think it belongs to Mark."
Ruby's.
Fingers trembled as she picked up the tag. She felt the weight of it in her hand. She closed her eyes and held it to her heart. "I think you're right," she whispered. "This was his." Joe nodded. "I want you to have it," he said. "And I want you to know he would be proud of you, proud that you remember him." His voice was steady, full of compassion. Ruby placed the tag at her throat and let the chain rest over her tattoo. The 2 marks, one inked, one metal, lay against her skin. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of connection, stronger than grief alone. She looked at Joe, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I will wear this," she said softly, "and I will tell his story." She closed her hand around the tag and lifted it. Joe smiled, and in that moment, they both felt the quiet power of memory and friendship. The diner around them continued. On customers came and went. Plates passed across counters. Laughter and conversation filled the air. But for Ruby and Joe, time had changed shape. Their shared moment would become a new memory, one that would carry them forward. Ruby gathered herself and stood up. She knelt beside Joe one last time and said, "Thank you for finding him again." Joe placed his hand over hers and nodded. "Thank you for letting me." She rose and returned to the counter, her steps lighter, her spirit lifted. Joe watched her move away, her posture proud now, her eyes bright with purpose. Then he placed it back on the table. He would carry this moment with him always. Meeting of 2 souls bound by loss and hope, honoring the past while looking forward to tomorrow. Ruby wiped the last drop of coffee from her cup and placed it gently on the saucer. She paused for a moment, looking around Miller's diner. The late afternoon sun poured through the windows, turning the tables and booths a warm gold. The regulars had returned, their voices softer now, but filled with a new kind of respect. Ruby felt a gentle flutter in her chest as she stood up. She rolled down her sleeves, but did not hide her tattoo. She lifted her chin and moved toward the counter. Maria saw her and offered a proud smile. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. Ruby nodded, her smile bright and genuine. "Better than okay," she said. She reached for a clean glass and filled it with ice water. She took a slow drink, feeling refreshed in a way she had not felt all day. The hum of the diner, once just background noise, now felt like music celebrating a small victory. A mother and her 2 children sat in a nearby booth. The little girl, who had earlier asked for more syrup, watched Ruby with curious eyes. When Ruby passed, the girl waved shyly. Ruby waved back, and the girl giggled. Ruby felt a warmth spread through her chest. Moments like this reminded her why she loved her job. The simple chance to connect, to make someone smile. The mother caught Ruby's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Ruby nodded and continued down the aisle between booths. At the corner, she found the group of teens from that morning. They sat quietly, fidgeting nervously, the plate of eggs and toast still untouched. One of the boys looked up at her when she approached. He cleared his throat and said softly, "Ruby, we're sorry again." His voice lacked the laughter of earlier. It was honest and a bit shaky. Ruby knelt beside them, careful not to loom over them. She looked into their eyes, searching for sincerity. She saw it there. She gave them a small, gentle smile. "It's okay," she said. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me." She waited for them to respond. The girl beside the boy nodded. "We understand more now," she said. "We're sorry for being rude," the boy added. "We won't stare again." Ruby pushed her hair back behind her ear. She felt proud of herself for listening, for giving them a chance to learn. "Thank you," she said again. "That means a lot." She stood and walked back to the counter, her steps confident. The teens watched her go, and for the first time, seemed to see her not as someone strange or broken, but as a person who deserved kindness. Back at the counter, Ruby found Joe Martin waiting by his usual booth. He smiled when he saw her. "How are you doing?" he asked. Ruby set down mugs she was drying and took a moment to answer truthfully. "I feel good," she said. "Today was hard, but I feel strong now." Joe nodded. "You showed real strength today," he said. "I'm proud to have met you." Ruby felt her cheeks warm. Joe's respect meant more to her than she could explain. "Thank you," she said softly. She turned to fill a fresh pot of coffee, the air filled with rich aroma again. As she worked, she thought about all that had happened, the teen's laughter, the apology, Joe's discovery of the tattoo, their shared memories. It felt like a dream she had woken up from, a dark cloud giving way to bright sunlight. Customers trickled in and out as dinner time approached. Ruby greeted each one with her usual cheer. She took orders, served food, and listened to stories. An old couple sat at the counter and commented on the perfect temperature of their soup. A businessman on a break from work praised the fries for being just right. Ruby smiled at each compliment and felt her own pride grow. She was good at her job, and today she had shown she was brave too. Around 6 o'clock, Ruby found a quiet moment. She walked outside to the small patio at the back of the diner. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a nearby tree. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The sky was streaked with pink and purple now. She thought of Joe waiting inside, of the dog tag and the stories they shared. She felt as if a journey had just begun, one not yet finished. Inside, Joe finished his coffee and stood. He left a folded note on the table beside his empty mug. Ruby would find it later, stepped out onto the patio behind her. She turned and saw him standing a few feet away, leaning against the railing. He smiled. "Beautiful evening," he said. Ruby nodded. "It is," she replied. They stood side by side for a moment, watching the sky, then Joe cleared his throat. "There's a meeting at the Veterans Center this Saturday," he said. "Some of us share stories and help each other. I'd like you to come." He looked at her, hope in his eyes. Ruby's heart fluttered. She had never been to the Veterans Center. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she felt a pull in her chest, a desire to keep honoring Mark's memory and to help others with scars like hers, whether visible or hidden. "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you for inviting me." Joe smiled broadly. "Great," he said. "Let pick you up at 10. He glanced at his watch, then straightened. "I should get going," he added. "Early rise tomorrow." He tipped an imaginary hat and turned to leave. Ruby watched him go, her heart light. She went back inside and found the note Joe left on the table. It was short. "Thank you for today and for honoring our brothers. See you Saturday." Folded it up and placed it in her apron pocket, close to her heart. She served the last customers of the evening, her movements calm and sure. After the diner closed, Ruby counted the till and cleaned the counter. She turned off the neon sign and swept the floor. The chairs were stacked on the tables and the kitchen was quiet. Maria locked the back door behind them. "Good night." "Ruby," Maria said. "You did amazing today." Ruby smiled tiredly. "Good night, Maria," she replied. She locked the front door and stepped onto the empty street. The town was peaceful now, streetlights glowing softly. She inhaled deeply and looked up at the sky, where the first stars appeared. She felt a sense of promise rising in her chest. She walked to her car, a small sedan parked in the lot. She climbed in and reached for the radio. A soft country song played as she drove away. The road was empty, and the lights of the diner disappeared in the rearview mirror. Ruby's mind replayed the events of the day, the laughter, the tears, the apology, the discovery, the dog tag, the invitation. It felt like many days had passed, but it was all one day. A day that changed her. When she arrived home, she sat at her kitchen table and pulled the dog tag from her apron pocket, held it in her hand and ran her fingers over the letters. She felt the weight of Mark's memory and Joe's kindness in her palm. She smiled softly and closed her eyes. Whispered, "I will remember you, Mark, and I will share your story." She placed the dog tag on the table next to a photo of herself and Mark in uniform, taken on the day they first trained together. Ruby lifted the photo, looked at the familiar faces, and felt a gentle warmth. She set the photo back and picked up a pen and notebook. She wrote at the top of a fresh page, "Stories to share at the Veterans Center." She began to write, starting with Mark's laughter, the railway bunkers, the jungle rain. She wrote of his kindness, his secret chocolates, his final sacrifice. Her words flowed in simple English, each sentence honest and clear. She did not stop until her hand ached and the page was filled with memories. She closed the notebook and turned off the kitchen light. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom and placed the notebook on her bedside table. She hung the dog tag on a small hook above it. As she lay under the soft quilt, she looked at the dog tag in the dim light. It felt peaceful. She drifted into sleep with thoughts of Saturday's meeting, of new friends waiting for her, and of Mark's story ready to be told. She knew tomorrow would bring its own challenges, preparing stories, maybe feeling nervous, facing more stairs. But she also knew she had grown stronger. She had faced laughter and come through with kindness. She had found a friend in Joe and a purpose in sharing memories. So she slept, wrapped in hope and the promise of new beginnings. The scars on her arm, once hidden in shame, now felt like an open path to healing. She would walk it proudly, one day at a time.